Right. We have questions to the Minister for the Cabinet Office. Rebecca Smith.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Minister, Cabinet.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 1, 4, 9, 12 and 16 together. The Government's 5 missions offer real benefits to people living in every part of the country. Higher living standards, more energy security, safer streets, lower waiting lists and a renewed confidence that the future will be better for our children. We've already made progress, launching a National Wealth Fund, providing an additional £22.6 billion for the NHS over the next couple of years, launching a new Border Security Command, providing £1.4 billion more for school rebuilding and removing the de facto ban on onshore wind farms. The Prime Minister will unveil his plan for change later this morning, which sets out how we'll deliver further on our missions over the next few years, and I'm due to give a statement to the House on this matter later this morning.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the clear lack of join-up between the Treasury and DEFRA over the family farm tax and family business tax, how will the Prime Minister's 5 mission boards learn from this to ensure that they do not become 5 mission silos?
Well, the Honourable Lady is right to say that one of the benefits of missions is to work across departmental boundaries, something that has been tried many times and is difficult to do. But I do believe that farmers and people in rural areas will benefit from greater energy security, from lower waiting lists in the NHS, from rising living standards and the other things that are at the heart of our missions.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Too many children face barriers to opportunity. Their life chances are being held back by rationed access to mental health support and diminished by a system that does not do enough to support those with special educational needs and disabilities. Can the Minister tell me what action can be taken on a cross-government basis to increase availability of mental health support to cover 100% of schools so that we can achieve our vital mission to break down barriers to opportunity?
Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Member is right to raise this. He will be aware that we've announced extra funding for special educational needs. This is an issue that is rising up the agenda and is causing a lot of anxiety to parents throughout the country. And at the heart of our missions is making sure that a greater proportion of young children are ready to start school, because if that's not the case, it can hold back their opportunity for the rest of their lives.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With GB Energy headquartered in Scotland and the Methil Yard in my constituency, a fantastic facility to build the renewables infrastructure we're going to need, how is my right honourable friend ensuring collaboration across government and with the Scottish Government delivers the mission for growth through investment in renewables?
I thank my honourable friend. As he says, we've made good progress on setting up Great British Energy. The publicly owned energy company, including announcing its headquarters will be in Aberdeen. This transition to clean power offers huge economic opportunities for the whole of the UK. I'm glad to report to the House that actually cooperation between the Scottish Government and the UK on this matter has been good, and this of course is at the heart of our clean energy mission.
Melanie.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could give us some indication of the timeline for GB Energy, when he expects it to be up and running at full functioning capacity, and if he thinks that there is any opportunity to incorporate green skills to support new jobs in areas like North East Lincolnshire, Grimsby and Cleethorpes.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member. In just 5 months, the Government's made significant progress in setting up Great British Energy. It's announced £25 million to establish the company, with a further £100 million of capital funding to spend in the next financial year. We have announced the partnership with the Crown Estate and selected the chair, Jürgen Meyer, and as I said a moment ago, Aberdeen as the location for the headquarters. In terms of the next steps, more information on Great British Energy's early priorities will come in the new year from the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, and that will support skills development across the country, including in the Humber, which is at the absolute forefront of the UK's net zero ambition and home, I'm pleased to say, to several groundbreaking renewable energy projects which we support.
Andrew Ranger.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A recent report by the Social Mobility Foundation showed that on average people from working class backgrounds are paid an incredible £6,000 less than their privileged peers. Does my right honourable friend agree that Labour's opportunity mission will be critical to ending this damning statistic and finally smashing the class ceiling that enables it?
Yeah. Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend. We firmly believe that whoever you are and wherever you come from, Britain should be a country where hard work means you can get on in life, and your circumstances of birth should never dictate your future. But the reality for too many children in Britain today is that that can be the case and opportunity can be limited. And our opportunity mission is aimed at breaking that link. We will roll out government-funded childcare to support improved access, delivering on the funded hours expansion and on the government's manifesto commitment to create 3,000 more school-based nurseries, increasing the availability of childcare places where they are needed most. And as I said, we want to get a greater proportion of children ready to start school when they walk into primary school for the first time.
Secretary Alex Burghart. Oh, sorry, Lisa Smart wants to come in. Come on, Lisa.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Stepping Hill Hospital in Hazel Grove is reported to have a repairs backlog of £130 million. The people on waiting lists which are elongated by this repairs backlog are, of course, police officers, teachers and nurses, thereby making it more difficult for the government to deliver on any of its other missions. Can the Secretary of State please assure the House that due weight is being given to reducing NHS waiting lists so that all of the other missions can be achieved?
Mr Speaker, we announced an extra £22 billion for the NHS over the next couple of years in the recent budget, and I can certainly assure her that reducing waiting times is at the heart of our missions, because with waiting times at their current levels, it is bad for people's health and bad for our economy.
Secretary Alex.
Very generous, Mr Speaker. Thank you. It's a pleasure to face the right honourable gentleman across the dispatch box for what I believe is the first time. And I'm very pleased to see that there are three members of the Cabinet opposite. Quite right that the Cabinet Office should be so well reflected at the top table. The day after he entered Downing Street, the Prime Minister pledged to personally chair each mission delivery board to drive through change. We now hear that he is not chairing each mission delivery board. Why has the Prime Minister broken his pledge?
Secretary.
Let me begin by welcoming the honourable gentleman to his position. I look forward to our exchanges. He is also the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, so I hope that his party leader is going to give him a Christmas bonus for productivity and hard work. He will certainly deserve it. The Prime Minister is very engaged in delivery of these missions. He meets regularly with the Secretaries of State in charge for mission stocktakes, and that is the benefit of having this kind of programme where the Prime Minister can personally hold Secretaries of State to account and make sure that they are all focused on delivery of the government's priorities.
Secretary Alex Burghart.
The right honourable gentleman is right. I mean, as the holder of two shadow portfolios, I get double the money. But there are. I'm sorry not to hear an explanation for why the Prime Minister has gone back on his word. But there are some growing concerns that the mission delivery boards are not being taken seriously. So yesterday at PACAC, those concerns were felt by members of the committee, where the right honourable gentleman's very capable permanent secretary said the governance and working of how we do this might not be immediately observable, which is a masterful piece of civil service phraseology, if ever there was one. These boards are not cabinet subcommittees, which means they're not authorised to make policy. The Prime Minister isn't there, so his authority is absent. The government won't reveal who's on them, what they discuss, or when they meet. These are starting to sound like figments of the government's imagination, a sort of litter of Schrödinger's cats. Will the right honourable gentleman at least commit to regular published updates on what each of the boards are doing, who sits on them, what decisions they make, what work they are undertaking, and what achievements they have achieved?
Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. He's going to get a published update in a couple of hours where he'll receive a very full account of what they've been doing, how they've been prioritising their work and what the next steps are. He is a former Cabinet Office Minister, and he will know that one of the wonderful things about the Cabinet Office is that it does a great deal of work under the bonnet, sometimes not in the full gaze of publicity, and that is the privilege of all of us who have served in the Cabinet Office. That is true of this work, but we are publishing a very important update later this morning.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission met on the 2nd of October in Brussels and agreed to strengthen the relationship between the UK and the EU. Maros Sefcovic, on behalf of the European Union, and I, on behalf of the UK Government, will now take forward that important work. We are committed to reducing barriers to trade, including negotiating a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement to reduce checks on food and put food on people's tables more cheaply.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud that the UK agriculture has some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, and it's for this reason that the production of foie gras was banned in 2007 because it's considered to be too cruel. Now, while we are desperate to reduce trade barriers with the UK, are there any steps to ban products like foie gras to ensure that all animal products sold in the UK are produced to at least the same standards as those produced as animal welfare standards in the UK?
He's absolutely right to raise the issue of very high standards of animal welfare in food production. What this government will do is prioritise that in trade policy, unlike the party opposite, which when they were in government negotiated FTAs which consistently undermined agriculture in the UK.
Shadow Minister Mountwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we all support efforts to remove unnecessary trade barriers, but we must also be clear with our European partners as to just what we cannot accept. So what is the Paymaster General prepared to say is off the table? Dynamic alignment, British fishing rights, or maybe asylum burden sharing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party manifesto set out our red lines in this negotiation. We will not go back to the battles of the past. We will not return to the single market. We will not return to the customs union. We will not return to freedom of movement. What we will do is negotiate with the European Union to make British people more secure, to make British people safer so that we have closer law enforcement cooperation, and we will negotiate to reduce trade barriers to make the British people more prosperous.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Democrats are glad that the Government has committed to resetting our relationship with the EU and that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are actively engaging to rebuild trust and our relationships with our European neighbours through meetings with the European Commission and the Foreign Affairs Council. Establishing a UK-EU youth mobility scheme would mirror existing capped arrangements that the UK already has with 13 countries, including Australia, New Zealand and Canada, and delivering such a scheme would provide a return on investment in the form of soft power that was never seemingly factored into the approach of the previous Conservative government. So will the Minister confirm to me that he will have discussions with Cabinet colleagues on the potential merits of a youth mobility scheme between the United Kingdom and the European Union? Thank you.
The Honourable Lady is right to highlight the importance of the Foreign Secretary's attendance at the Foreign Affairs Council. It's hugely important that we work together with our European partners on security, particularly in the dangerous world environment that we find ourselves in at the moment. On the issue that she raised about youth mobility, we will of course listen to what the EU has to say, but we have no plans for a youth mobility scheme and we will not return to freedom of movement.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, number 4, Mr. Speaker. Sorry.
Right. No, 5 anyhow, but don't worry.
Sorry. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will take question 5, 11 and 14 together. I've spent the last few weeks meeting with SMEs, VCS organisations, wider businesses and contracting authorities, discussing how we ensure that the around 300 billion that is spent each year on public sector procurement delivers for our communities. With this government, procurement will deliver value for money, better public services and our national missions. A new Procurement Act commences in February 2025, creating a simpler, more flexible procurement system underpinned by a new mission-led national procurement policy statement to ensure that public procurement delivers on the government's missions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses are a crucial part of the economy in Cumbernauld and Kirkintilloch. Huge opportunities to help them further, and one way of doing it is to work across the public sector and with local authorities, in my case North Lanarkshire Council, Eastern Bartonshire Council, from contracts as big as the redevelopment of Cumbernauld Town Centre. Can I ask the Minister what will they work with local authorities and the Scottish Government to support more small businesses in being able to successfully bid for contracts?
I'd like to thank my honourable member for that question, and I absolutely think it is critical that we open up public procurement to small businesses. As I said, £300 billion is a huge amount of public money, and the opportunity to ensure that SMEs have access to that is critical. As the honourable member said, SMEs are rooted in our communities and they provide local, often good quality jobs. And we're taking action now to crack down on late payments that hit the cash flow of small businesses. The Chancellor recently announced that companies bidding for large government contracts will be excluded from the procurement process if they do not pay their own suppliers within an average of 45 days.
Lesterson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The last government promised to give more contracts through procurement to small businesses, something they failed to do for 14 years. Instead, they chose to use government contracting to support their mates through COVID. Will the Minister confirm that this government will use the power of government spending to contract directly with small businesses to support local businesses and economies across the country, in stark contrast to the enrichment we saw of their mates by the party opposite?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for their question, and as I said, we will absolutely work hard to ensure that public contracts are supporting small businesses. I've spent a lot of time talking with small businesses about how we support this through the new public procurement policy and statement. And the Chancellor has announced this week a new COVID Corruption Commissioner who will be taking action to recover public money.
Steinbeck.
The residents of Falkirk want a government that works day in, day out to deliver value for money for the taxpayer. Never has this been so true as now, considering the broken public finances left by the Tories and the 17 years of waste and inaction up the road by the SNP. Does the Minister agree with me that the billions we spend on public procurement must deliver value for the taxpayer? Can he tell me what steps the government are taking to ensure that this is the case?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for their question. And when our public services are facing so much strain and desperately need rebuilding, it is absolutely critical that we cut down on waste and deliver value for money. Under the previous government, the procurement system too often failed to drive that efficiency, as shown by the shocking levels of fraud and waste during the pandemic. We will bring new transparency to the public sector procurement, along with a relentless focus on fraud.
James Wise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Gross public sector procurement spend was £400 billion last year. What is the government's precise target for delivering greater savings from that budget?
Minister.
400 billion is an enormous amount of money, and we need to ensure that that money is going into growth and delivering for our communities, SMEs, and ensuring it really delivers on our missions. We are absolutely determined to act on procurement and bring down efficiency, and we'll be setting out our further information in February. But we cannot take lessons from the party opposite about cutting down on waste and efficiencies when they oversaw gross mismanagement that Lord Agnew himself called schoolboy errors in delivering procurement for this country.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The focus on public procurement is going to be welcomed by SMEs in the cybersecurity sector in my constituency, Cheltenham. SINAM has thousands of members, and when I talk to the SMEs in that community, they tell me that there is a real risk that we are losing talent in the startups community to places like Lisbon and Toronto and other places abroad. I wonder whether the Minister can confirm to me that the steps being put in place by the government are good news for the SME community in SINAM.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for their question, and I absolutely believe that we need to ensure, as I've said, that we are supporting SMEs. I'll be more than happy to speak to SMEs in your constituency and to talk about the opportunities, because there is so much innovation and talent happening around the country, and we need to ensure that public sector money is supporting our growth mission and supporting the good businesses in communities like yours.
Jim Shaw. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for that answer to those questions. Can I ask the Minister a very simple question? What steps have been taken to rely on better procurement measures domestically within the United Kingdom and the devolved nations, and particularly Northern Ireland, as opposed to relying on international partners to provide or deliver goods? Thanks so much.
Minister.
Through our procurement regime, we're determined, as I said, to support small businesses, often locally rooted, and we'll continue to do that, but taking account of our trade obligations.
Shadow Minister Richard Oldham.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say to the Minister how delighted it is to meet across the dispatch box. I've also been meeting very many small SMEs in the aftermath of the budget. The impact of the government's decision to raise national insurance on many indirect providers of public services, like GPs and hospices, appear not to have been fully factored into the government's workings at the time of the budget. Can I ask, therefore, now that the government have had over a month to do the figures, what the impact on public procurement of the national insurance job tax will be on the cost of public procurement to the nearest, say, £1,000 million of this reform?
Minister.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the honourable member to their place and look forward to meeting them across the dispatch box. Unfortunately, the last government left this country in a terrible place. Public services in crisis. I previously was a council leader, and I saw every single day the absolute strain on our public services. People waiting up to 12 hours for ambulances, sometimes that didn't turn up, and we have had to take action to invest in our public services to deliver growth. And with our procurement regime, we are, as I've set out, we are already taking action to support SMEs, to ensure that money is not lost, to ensure suppliers are paid quickly, and I will set out more to the House in February.
We've got to get through a list. Give me a chance to get through. We're only on 6. Alistair Carmichael.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Genomics, of course, is a great British success story, and our genomic databases are vital for world-leading life sciences and health research. These organisations who have such databases have to provide data protection and security training, and have to make sure that researchers can only access data for approved purposes. The opportunities that come with risks do come with risks. That's why the government will always try to minimise the risks from biological data to protect our bioeconomy, and we're working across government departments on this issue and through our national security structures.
I take it will not be designating it as critical national infrastructure then, which was the question. As the government seeks to reset the relationship with China, will ministers be mindful of the old maxim that you need a long-handled spoon to sup with the devil, and that there are companies like BGI, Chinese genomics companies, who do not behave just as normal commercial competitors? And will he ensure that British genomics interests are not left vulnerable as a consequence of any reset relationship?
I think the right honourable member raises a very important question, which is always the twin interests of national security and economic growth. Now, in this territory, we work with UK organisations which hold genomic data to make sure, as I said, that they've got robust data protection systems in place, and our security services do give them advice on these matters on a regular basis, so that our pursuit of growth does not conflict with our very important national security objectives.
Richard Ford.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to answer questions 7 and 13 together. The government's first responsibility is to keep the public safe. That's why national resilience is a top priority for the government. In July, I announced I would lead a review of resilience. Work has been progressing across government. We've engaged at all levels with the public, private and voluntary sectors, and this work is overseen by the dedicated Resilience Subcommittee of the National Security Council, which I chair. It is also closely linked to our consideration of the COVID Inquiry Module 1 report, to which the Government will respond next month within the 6-month timeframe set out by the Chair.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That Module 1 report that the Minister refers to recommended resilience and preparedness, and in particular bringing in external expertise from outside the government and outside civil service to guard against groupthink. How is the Minister planning to bring in that external expertise, and would he consider issuing a brochure to British citizens on preparation for crises in the way that the Swedish government has just done?
Oh, Secretary.
I think the honourable member raises an important point. My ministerial colleague, Minister Apong-Azari, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary, has done a great deal of work on consulting people outside government, external experts, right across business, voluntary sectors, local government and so on. It's really important that as part of this, we don't just have the voices in Whitehall, but beyond that too.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this, the Module 1 of the UK COVID-19 inquiry, it finds that the impact was most acutely felt by the most vulnerable, the elderly, those with pre-existing health conditions, people living in overcrowded housing and on low incomes. So as the government undertakes its review, can the Minister assure the House that the government will work to deliver resilience for everyone and not just some of us?
Mr. Speaker, this is such an important point. If resilience is to mean anything, it has to be for us all and not just for some. My honourable friend is right to say that one of the weaknesses of past tragedies, whether it's COVID-19, Grenfell Tower or others, is that it's often the most vulnerable in our society that are hardest hit. That's why it's so important that we learn the lessons of the past and have support for the most vulnerable at the heart of this. And my ministerial colleague, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary, recently met with senior representatives from a range of organisations who support people disproportionately impacted during emergencies and crises to make sure that resilience is indeed for all and not just for some.
Nick Smith.
Number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I set out in my speech to the NATO Cyber Defence Conference last week, we are working to strengthen the UK's cyber resilience, but there is, of course, still more to do. In the King's Speech, we announced the Government would bring forward a Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, which will help strengthen the UK's cyber defences and work with industry to help to make the UK a safe place to live and work online. But I do stress to the House, this is an ongoing effort. It can never be perfect, but we are constantly working to make sure we've got the strongest cyber defences possible.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his response. At the Ebervale College, there's a brilliant cyber security course training young people for jobs in this growing sector. However, the National Cyber Security Chief says there's a gap widening between the UK's defences and threats posed by hostile nations. So can the Minister confirm what's being done to scale up the workforce to defend our crucial infrastructure?
Secretary.
Well, let me begin by congratulating the Ebervale College for the brilliant cyber security course to which he referred. But he's right to point out the threat. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to the NATO Cyber Security Conference last week. There are state and non-state actors who are constantly probing our defences. It is a constant effort to keep them strong, but we are determined to work not only with education, but with business, with our critical national infrastructure, to make sure that we are as well protected as we can be against the threats that we face. In thinking about security, it is no longer just about hard military power, it is also about cyber security, and that's why it's got to be a real priority for the government.
Lincoln John.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are currently 4 vacancies in the Prime Minister's office that are being advertised. These roles are all advertised across the civil service or externally. The House will also have seen that the Prime Minister announced the appointment of Sir Chris Wormald as the new Cabinet Secretary earlier this week. I'm sure the whole House will join me in congratulating him on his appointment.
Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I personally would be delighted to welcome the new Cabinet Secretary to his role. The one job I didn't hear listed in the answer, for which I thank the Minister, was whether the Cabinet Office are hiring a new Prime Minister's envoy to the nations and regions to carry out the vital work that was just about to be done by Sue Gray when she decided not to take the job. So are you hiring another one?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman seems to have a curious interest in jobs at number 10. If he's considering a career change, I would be very happy to have a private word with him.
We're in the just.
Question number 15, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for their question. As a former council leader, I've seen firsthand the crisis in public services. People falling between the cracks of systems that are under extreme strain. To reform this, we need to get out of Whitehall and support workers across the public sector to do things differently. From intervening early to support families, a white paper overhauling employment support, and an ambitious programme of reform of the NHS, this government is determined to reform public services to deliver for citizens.
We're in the just.
Mr. Speaker, under the party opposite, too much of taxpayers' money was wasted on projects and schemes that simply did not work. Does the Minister agree with me that in order to improve healthcare services, including mental health services, educational opportunities and social services, as well as transport provision and public safety in my constituency of Wolverhampton West, it is vital that the government continually tests and refines its policies to ensure that they are effective and continue to be effective?
Minister.
I wholeheartely agree with that. I heard too often from those on the front line that they're fed up of policy being made in a closed hall, a closed room in Whitehall, and not with those who have real experience of the front line. The budget announced the introduction of a public sector reform and innovation fund to support us to test and learn with places around the UK. We'll learn from the best evidence across the public sector. And on Monday, I met all of the What Works centres across the government to really understand the evidence of what works and how we can scale that to deliver for communities around the country.
Grimsby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all remember that the Secretary of State for Health undertook there will be no additional money going into the NHS without reform being secured. That, like so many other broken promises, was dropped, 22 or 25 billion, whatever it is, announced. And then afterwards, the Secretary of State for Health, do you know what he said, Mr. Speaker? He repeated the pledge. There'd be no extra money without reform. Well, the cat is out of the bag, but perhaps the Minister today can undertake on behalf of the government that never again will we see vast increases in public expenditure without the reform of public services, because we need an improvement in productivity, not just additional spending.
Yeah. Minister.
Well, I'm really surprised to hear the party opposite express concern about money that's desperately needed going into our NHS when people are waiting for GP appointments, they are waiting in ambulances, and under the party opposite, police officers would spend hours sitting with people with mental health concerns. Is that productivity? But the Secretary of State has set out an incredibly ambitious reform agenda for the NHS, moving resources into prevention, taking account of the amazing opportunities in digital technology to give people more control over their own health. We are the party that backs the NHS and fixes the mess left by the previous government.
Polly Billington.
Sorry. Question 18, Mr. Speaker.
The Government has brought forward the House of Lords Hereditary Peers Bill as an immediate first step in reform that will remove the right of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the House of Lords. It's passed this House unamended. It will have its second reading in the other place next week. In addition to that, I'm proud to announce today that I have laid a written ministerial statement that will ensure that political parties nominating people for peerages in the other place will now have to publish, alongside the nomination, a 150-word summary as to why they are putting that person forward. That is, Mr. Speaker, another reform that this government is proud to announce in its wider agenda.
Polly Billington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome my right honourable friend's response on that, particularly the fact that it will increase transparency for the other place. Does he agree with me that we have a mandate for reform? And while respecting the individuals, we are absolutely determined as a government to progress the abolition of the hereditary principle in lawmaking.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It just shouldn't be the case in a modern legislature that there are places reserved for people by accident of birth. That bill has now passed this House unamended. As I've indicated, Mr. Speaker, it will now go before the other place for its second reading next week. And of course, we want to get that bill onto the statute book as soon as possible.
We come to topicals. Alison Bennett.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said a few moments ago, last week I addressed the NATO Cyber Defence Conference about the increasingly aggressive and reckless behaviour from Russia in particular in the cyber realm, including attacks on NATO members. I made it clear that no one will intimidate us into weakening our support for Ukraine. I announced a laboratory for AI security research and a new incident unit to help our allies respond to cyber attacks against them. Mr. Speaker, we promise to make a tangible difference in people's lives. I will shortly be setting out in this House our ambitious plan for change over the next few years, and copies of that plan will be made available to members in advance of the statement.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the recent debate on the infected blood compensation scheme, the Government made promising indications regarding boosting engagement with affected groups. Victims and their families in mid-Sussex and across the country have been waiting for decades for answers, and it is essential that people begin to receive the compensation which is so long overdue. I asked the Minister why the Government made last-minute changes to the accepted documents for interim compensation claims required from estates of people who died after receiving contaminated blood and blood products. And will he tell me what action is being taken to tackle the unacceptable delays in the...
Can I just say gently to the Honourable, we're now on topicals and we're meant to be short and punchy. Today we seem to have a bit of time, but please try and help each other. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me assure the Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, the Paymaster General, who leads on this issue, is fully aware of the issues she's raised. He is working with the groups affected, and he is determined to ensure that initial payments are out by the end of the year.
Jill Jam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has rightly made tackling child poverty a top priority. But of course, this isn't a children problem, this is a society problem. So I really welcome the cross-departmental approach that's been taken to this. So last week, the Great British, the Get Britain Working Plan was published, and does my right honourable friend agree with me that helping people, particularly parents, into decent, well-paid jobs is a key part of this agenda?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it is shameful that child poverty increased by 700,000 under the last government. Tackling child poverty is at the heart of this government's mission. The Child Poverty Task Force, which I sit on, will publish its strategy in spring. Increasing the number of parents working and their earnings and hours plays a crucial role, and that's why our plans to Get Britain Working and the Employment Rights Bill are important in tackling the scourge of child poverty.
Secretary Alex Burghart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Was the Cabinet Office's proprietary and ethics team informed by Downing Street of the former Transport Secretary's conviction before she was appointed as a Minister of the Crown?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the Transport Secretary had exchanges with the Prime Minister last week, which has resulted in her resigning from the post. She set out her reasons for her resignation in that letter. We now have a new Transport Secretary who has already made an excellent start in the job.
Burghart.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for restating what is already known. Obviously, it is a matter of public interest as to whether Pett had been informed before the right honourable lady was made Transport Secretary. So I ask him again, will he confirm whether or not the Proprietary and Ethics team was informed by Downing Street of the former Transport Secretary's conviction before she was appointed a Minister of the Crown?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, all Cabinet Ministers have an interview with declarations to the Propriety and Ethics team before they are appointed to government. I am aware of what I told the Propriety and Ethics team before my appointment, but I do not look through the declarations from every other Minister.
Lloyd Hatton.
The previous Conservative government exposed itself to unprecedented levels of corruption and cronyism when delivering contracts during the pandemic. It's shown that by recent analysis that £1 in £3 spent went on high-risk contracts. This is worth more than £15 billion. What steps is the government taking to ensure that this government is always making procurement decisions that are in the public interest, avoiding unmanaged and unmitigated conflicts? And what will they do to ensure the taxpayers' money is always spent wisely?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise that point. Earlier this week, the Chancellor announced the appointment of Tom Hayhoe as the COVID Counter-Fraud Commissioner. He will leave no stone unturned to investigate the unacceptable waste and fraud during the pandemic and make sure that we learn lessons for the future.
We come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, I introduced a 10-minute rule bill to bring in proportional representation for Westminster elections and English local elections. I was delighted that it passed a division of the House supported by Labour members, reflecting Labour Party policy on this matter. Now that it is the express will of the House that my bill gets a second reading, will the Secretary of State commit to government time that it can be fully debated?
Mr. Speaker, I hate to do this as we're approaching the festive season, but I am afraid I'm going to have to disappoint the Honourable Lady. We have no plans to change the electoral system, and I cannot give her the government time that she requires.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We owe a great debt of gratitude to our exceptional public servants who have given their lives to serve our nation. Can the Minister update the House on what progress has been made in establishing the Elizabeth emblem to commemorate former firefighters, police officers and other public servants who have died in public service?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for that question. We must never forget those who have given their lives to protect others in the line of duty. Last month, the government announced the first recipients of the Elizabeth emblem, with the next of kin of over 30 former firefighters, police officers and other public servants who have died in public service receiving the award in recognition of their deceased loved ones. While families will never be able to replace their loved ones, the Elizabeth emblem pays tribute to the sacrifice they made, and I know the whole House will support this.
Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. DS Ross Hunt and PC George Taylor were murdered in the line of duty in 1976 and 1983, and due to campaigning by myself and others, were recently awarded the Elizabeth emblem to their families. But due to administrative errors, they did not receive the George Cross. Can a Cabinet Minister meet with me to discuss this issue so that their bravery is recognised as well as their deaths?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for raising this, and I also pay tribute as well. We will follow this up if you write to us. Thank you.
Response.
Mr Speaker. Due to the dire economic inheritance that we as the Labour government have inherited from the party opposite, it is vital that every penny of public money is spent wisely. In my constituency of Harlow, £29 million was spent on a new hospital, Sir Frederick Gibbard College, only for it to be deemed unsafe and having to be pulled down. Can I ask what steps the government are going to take to ensure we spend money wisely, don't spend unnecessary money on unnecessary consultants, and ensure that we get the best for people in Harlow?
Minister.
Thank the honourable member for their question. Under the party opposite, too much taxpayer money was wasted on eye-watering consultancy contracts. We're taking steps to stop all non-essential government consultancy spending this year and halve government spending on consultancy in future years. It might be hard for the party opposite to hear about their record, but it is harder for us to live with it.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week, the Government released its latest departmental lobbying transparency data. The data was 2 months late and relates to the last months of the previous government, namely April to June 2024. The public will only learn whom the new government met during its first weeks in power at the end of December, a full 6 months after the election. That's only if the data is released on time. UK lobbying rules have more holes than Swiss cheese, so will the government set a timeline for creating a central database of departmental transparency data with monthly updates, thereby closing the litany of loopholes in the current lobbying rules?
Mr Speaker, the government is committed to transparency around lobbying. That's why we will have regular transparency updates. And the approach that we take, frankly, would be in stark contrast to the government that preceded us.
Mr Osborne.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I listened earnestly last week to the Minister at the Cyber Security Conference, and it is timely given my local council was subject to a cyber attack, possibly by a foreign actor, only in the last 4 weeks. Can I ask the Minister what measures he is undertaking to improve cyber security resilience in local councils, but also in critical national infrastructure that might impact us in the future?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I'm very sorry to hear about the cyber attack against his local authority. Attacks like this can, of course, have a serious impact for local residents. As I said in my speech to the NATO Cyber Defence Conference last week, the Government is determined to strengthen cyber resilience in the UK, and we do publish guidance on this. We also meet with stakeholders. Advice is available from the National Cyber Security Centre. In October, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government launched the Cyber Assessment Framework for Local Government, which is particularly geared at the local authorities, about which my honourable friend speaks.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, what now for our special envoy? Lament the people of Scotland now that Sue Gray has told the Prime Minister what he can do with his job offer. But might I suggest to the Minister, in the spirit of cross-border cooperation, that he informed Number 10 that we have known all along that this has been nothing more than an embarrassing fiasco and a cynical, face-saving attempt by the Prime Minister who thinks we must button up the back.
Secretary.
Mr Speaker, I thought the honourable member was going to give me some Christmas greetings there, but I'm still waiting. In the absence of any envoys, I have to tell him that he's going to have to put up with me instead as the Minister for Intergovernmental Relations. It's a part of my job I take very seriously for perhaps obvious reasons, and I enjoyed my conversations yesterday with the First Minister of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and the Deputy First Minister, and I will keep having them.
Andy McNee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of today's very important announcements around the mission milestones, could we hear a bit about the important work of the mission boards that have led us to this point?
Mr Speaker, I'll have more to say on this shortly, but I do think it's important that governments set out what they're trying to do and the timescale that they're trying to do, particularly when we have an atmosphere of politics where the serious point is there is a lack of faith among many in the electorate about the ability of governments of any stripe to seriously deliver. We take that seriously and we want to do something about it.
Jim Allister.
Next Tuesday, the Northern Ireland Assembly is to be invited to agree that the European Parliament should make their laws for the next 4 years in 300 areas of law affecting Northern Ireland. In that regard, the Cabinet Office issued an explanatory document. It does not set out what was meant to be set out according to the Windsor Framework. Article 18 of the Windsor Framework said this process would be conducted strictly in accordance with the UK Unilateral Declaration of October 2019. That declaration required a public consultation. There has been no public consultation. Why is that, and why is the matter proceeding in the absence of it?
I will, of course, look at the specific document that the Honourable Gentleman has referred to. He's also referred to the very important consent vote that is taking place in the Northern Ireland Assembly next week. I should say that this government supports the Windsor Framework. That is why, when we were in opposition, we voted with the then government to support it. We are committed to implementing it in good faith, and that is what this government will do.
Lola Backerboy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that public procurement is a vital lever for delivering our growth mission, and growth must be felt by people in every part of our country. So what steps is the Minister taking to ensure that when taxpayers' money is spent on private contracts, the key workers delivering that contract and the local communities like mine in Darlington maximise the benefits of this public money?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question and the time that she spent with me last week setting out the opportunities of procurement and the needs of her community in Darlington. I think we've heard from the whole House today how important it is to back small and medium-sized enterprises that have roots in communities, and we're determined that the new National Policy Procurement Statement will do that.
Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to give the Chancellor Christmas greetings and say, as I'm sure most of us in this House feel, a great deal of respect for the Right Honourable Gentleman. But as the Prime Minister knew that he was appointing a convicted fraudster to the Cabinet, was it not incumbent upon him to tell the Propriety and Ethics team? So that's question one. And question two, if I can slip two in, Mr. Speaker, is will the Chancellor, who is committed and leads government on transparency and openness, all of which have been promised, will he undertake, notwithstanding the fact he hasn't looked at these declarations, to find out and let the House know whether she declared it to the House?
To the when to start.
As I said to his colleague on the front bench a few moments ago, of course all secretaries Secretaries of State upon appointment give their declaration to the Propriety and Ethics team. The matter was concluded last Friday with the Secretary of State's resignation. She has been replaced by a new Secretary of State, and she set out her reasons for her resignation in her resignation letter, and if the Honourable Member hasn't had a copy, I'm quite happy to make it available to them.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Government's commitment to a duty of candour for public bodies in the light of the appalling crimes of John Smith, who left over 100 children assaulted and traumatised while senior members of the Church of England looked the other way. What steps is the Minister considering in conjunction with the Church of England so that it can designate bishops, dioceses, cathedrals and national church institutions as public authorities for the purposes of the Freedom of Information Act?
Well, in relation to my honourable friend's second point, it's right, obviously, that the Church of England looks very carefully now at its procedures in light of what has happened and has been brought forward. In relation to the duty of candour, I have no idea why the opposition front bench is laughing about that. It's a hugely important reform that we're bringing forward. It will make a significant difference across public service, where we will have public servants putting the public interest above their own personal reputation and above the reputation of institutions. So I hope that the opposition from bench will come to support and help in leadership that's going to be required for that step change, that culture change across public service.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Golden Valley development adjacent to GCHQ in Cheltenham will play a vital role in our nation's cybersecurity. The recent confirmation of £20 million from the government for that development is welcome, but will the Secretary of State confirm that this project will continue to feature in future iterations of the National Cyber Strategy?
I thank him for his honourable question. I think the best thing to do when it comes to a specific place is for me to look into the exact situation there and come back to him. But I do assure him, as I've said several times during this session, Mr. Speaker, that cyber security is extremely important to the government. and it's not just the government's job. This is something that has to be taken seriously by business, by the whole of society. That is why we have the National Cyber Security Centre giving advice to bodies of all kinds to make sure that they are defended as well as possible.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I, first of all, welcome Government's commitment to the blood compensation scheme. I think everybody in the House and everybody across this country is very, very pleased to see that. But can I ask just a simple question, please, if you can? As of this month, how many individuals have registered for infected blood compensation payments? And can the Minister provide an update for delivery of compensation in 2025? I'm really pleased to get those figures for the United Kingdom, but in particular for Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Secretary of State.
I'm more than happy to write to him with the specific figures for Northern Ireland, as I have done in the past. He knows I'm always happy to do that. In terms of the timescale for payments, I've already indicated that it will be the first payments in respect of the infected people out of the door by the end of this year. With regard to the affected people, when I've undertaken to bring forward the regulations for the affected and get them through the House, subject, of course, to this House's approval by the 31st of March next year, in order that payments to the affected can start in 2025.
That completes questions. We'll let the front bench change over.